Russ, it's great to connect today, and I'm excited to learn more about the newest report from the Association of Professional Builders. First, for those who don't know me, I'm Jana Colucci, and I'm the CEO and co founder of Bundle. Bundle is a digital purchasing platform for builders and suppliers, allowing builders to run materials procurement at 10x speed and find 10 to 20% cost savings, and enabling suppliers to digitize and automate their selling process. So to kick us off, Russ, it'd be great to hear you talk a little bit more about APB and your role there, and also the history of the State of the Residential Construction Industry report that we're talking about today.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Jana. Really looking forward to chatting with you today. But yeah, sure. The story with APB actually began around about 2010 when I came across a software product in the US called Co-Construct that hadn't really been discovered in Australia or New Zealand. There was actually only 3 builders using it at the time. So I introduced Co-Construct to Australia, New Zealand and the UK, and over the next few years signed up over 1,000 builders to that particular platform. But it was during that process that I always talked to the builders afterwards and talked to them about their business and what was happening, and they always said the same thing. They were solving one issue, but they needed more leads, and that led me to start a digital marketing agency with my daughter, Sky Stevens. So we set up a digital marketing agency purely for residential home builders and started building websites and doing social media campaigns and advertising and Google advertising, and we're generating quality leads for builders. But the one thing that a lot of the builders were saying to us, or about half the builders were saying, were the leads were rubbish. They were saying they're not as good as the leads I normally get. Whereas the other half of builders were saying the leads are great. And when we delved into it, we realized that the builders that were struggling didn't have a sales process. So that became the next natural step. So in 2014, we launched Acris Sales Training, which was focused on providing builders with a documented sales process and then teaching them how to take a consumer or a prospect through that sales process. So now we're generating good quality leads for builders, and the builders are now taking those leads through to sales. But very soon we realized that some of the guys were still struggling because although they had the good quality leads, they had the sales, they were still time poor, and they weren't earning the kind of margins they deserved to be earning. So in 2015, we launched the Association of Professional Builders, a business coaching company dedicated to improving the industry for both builders and consumers. And since then, we've obviously expanded into the US and Canada. And as part of that growth, I guess, in 2020, we decided to run a survey of the construction industry in all these different countries, because a lot of things we hear is, well, you're in Australia, it's different here in Texas, in New York, in Alabama. And we knew that wasn't quite true because what we're talking about here is strategy. And we thought a good way to maybe identify if there were any differences was by surveying the industry. So that's what we did. And that was back in 2020. So we launched the first report in 2021. And now here we are, 3 years later, having just collected the data from 2022 and having just published the 2023 report, which over 1,000 owners and directors of residential building companies took part in, answering over 111 questions. So that is a lot of data that we've been able to comb through and really demonstrate that it doesn't matter if you're in the US, Canada, or Australia, or even New Zealand. There's a lot of similarities there.
Wow, amazing. And I continue to be impressed with how many builders you got to fill out the survey. How many in the very first survey, how many builders would you say filled that one out?
I think it was about 400
Wow, all
took
right.
part, and then last year it was about 670, I think, off the top of my
Wow.
head. And bear in mind as well, we do cull out any respondents that are not owners and directors of residential building companies because we don't want the data to be skewed. So it has to be relevant. It has to fit in a tight niche. And 111 questions, that's a big commitment. So hats off to every builder that took part in this survey.
Yeah, very cool. Well, awesome. That's really helpful context, really, to set the stage. And before we get too deep into some of the findings of the report, as you mentioned, there's a lot in there. I did want to touch briefly on what you see as the overall state of the industry, especially in the US. I know at least I get asked all the time about market slowdown, but we also know that housing affordability is still a major issue. And just curious, we see in the report that almost 50% of respondents expect to sign more contracts in 2023 than 2022, which doesn't seem like a market slowdown at all to me, at least not yet. And just curious to hear a little bit more of your thoughts around that.
Yeah, and I think an important thing that we have to keep in mind when we look at the data from this survey is context.
Mm,
Now, the context for this data is that we are typically working with the top 20% of the industry, professional builders operating professionally run building companies. And what we've seen over the years is that even in a slowdown, when things get extraordinarily tough, like we saw in the GFC, the
mhm,
best businesses continue to win. It's the companies in the middle and especially the bottom that really do suffer when there's a slowdown, because there is always business, but it's the top 20% that get their fill and get the best clients. So we have to keep that in mind when we do look at these answers. But yes, I agree that that surprised me, the confidence in the industry, expecting to sign more. And it's not wishful thinking either, because as a coaching company, we work very closely with over 600 building companies in 5 different countries. So we see the data as well as the wish list, and what we can say is that the builders of professionally operated building companies have had a record year in 2022 in terms of profitability. Whereas if you look at the news, the industry is struggling with profitability. Now, that was true for every builder in 2021, but the smaller, more professionally run building companies, they got back into profit very quick because they're agile. They reacted to the situation. And I believe it's the same when it comes to looking ahead for 2023 in terms of sales. The reason they're optimistic is because they have their marketing funnels
mm,
firing, and so they will get the best clients and will continue to grow their building companies.
makes sense. And I know the report mentioned a little bit about backlog too, which is something that we've been seeing this year. Just kind of builders having a big pipeline or even projects already signed, even financed, getting ready to build and not even having the capacity to do so. So seems
Yeah,
like
and this is
a
a
good
big
signal.
strategy. Yeah, a big strategy that we teach at the Association of Professional Builders. It's called construction slots, and it
Mm,
taps into the supply and demand formula that all businesses or all successful businesses are built around. And I think a mistake a lot of building companies make is that they service their demand, and you never want to do that. A great book that I'd recommend reading is Oversubscribed,
mm,
and that, if you read that book, it will really outline how you want to cap your supply,
mm,
uh, i.e., limit your supply and increase your demand, because that makes you the a scarce resource, which human beings are wired to chase scarce resources and value scarce resources. But you want to be the builder that's a scarce resource and has a backlog, has a wait list of a year, as many of our members do, between 12 and 18 months. Obviously, as we've seen with the rising costs of construction, you've got to be on top of your costs, and you've got to reprice that job, before it actually starts. You can't be repricing it halfway through the build after the client's committed. But the client commits, they get a construction slot. Maybe it's a year later or 9 months later you start the build. You've got to reprice that and make sure they're paying the current price.
Great insights. And I have not heard of that book, so I'm going to check it out. It sounds like a good one. Awesome. One of the other interesting things in the report, or a section of the report, confirmed that subcontractor delays, which I think of as labor shortages, as well as sourcing materials and cost overruns, continue to be the largest challenges when it comes to running projects. And I know there's probably a lot to dig into there, but If we focus first on the labor side, the report mentions how hard it's been to recruit and retain key staff across many different industries, including construction. And just interested to hear a little bit more of what you've been seeing there, how you expect this to maybe change or not change in the coming months and year.
Yeah, well, I think if we look back to pre-COVID, labor shortages have always been very extreme in the US,
Mhm,
and they've been more extreme in the US than any other country that we've seen. Canada, Australia, New Zealand have not experienced the same shortages on labor as US builders have experienced. However, what COVID did was it put an incredible strain on key personnel as well, which we hadn't seen pre-COVID, and we've seen this around the world where key staff, estimators, project managers, general managers are all being headhunted by companies because of the surge in demand and headhunted with ridiculous salaries on
mhm,
offer, probably unsustainable salaries, if
mhm.
we're completely honest. Unless inflation, gathers pace and kind of catches up with these salaries that are being paid, I don't think these companies will be able to continue paying those rates. Um, but what it did do was it forced a lot of builders actually in kind of mid-sized companies, and I'm talking $3 to $6 million in revenue. It forced a lot of those owners of building companies back on site themselves because
Mhm.
the shortages were so dire, and in a desperate attempt to keep their projects moving,
Huh.
they were forced to pick up the slack themselves, which is obviously a terrible situation to be in as a business owner. I think we will start to see things settle down as demand softens. We're starting to see it a little bit already. You know, there's still pressure there, but it's not as bad because we had a combination of skyrocketing demand around the world for construction,
Mhm.
and of course, the lockdowns reduced working hours effectively. When you look at available working hours throughout the year, it reduced them, which just compounded it. And then, of course, the supply chain issues, delays of getting materials to site, ended up in a lot of wasted days as well for the labour force. So, you know, it wasn't just one thing. There was a lot of factors going on which are all easing. So I think it will improve, but that's not to say it's going to be an acceptable level.
Yeah, very interesting. I'm also interested to dig a little bit deeper on the labor piece. I think one of the things that stood out to me in the report was that many of the people filling out the report were in their 40s and 50s, which may just be a sign of who is in a leadership position, who is filling out the report. But I know that we often see this general trend in the industry with fewer younger people coming into the industry and kind of concern for some of those older people aging out, retiring. I'm wondering if that's something that you're seeing through your role in coaching at APB or just what you think about that trend generally.
Yeah, look, as a trend, it is concerning, and I think it's been highlighted in terms of the trades because the younger generation simply aren't as enthused about coming in and learning a trade and committing to a trade as they were in previous generations, and even the ones that aren't staying, which is a massive concern. I've heard it actually said that we don't have a problem with attracting people into the trades, we have a problem with keeping them in the trades, and that has a knock-on effect with builders as well, because the typical pathway to become a residential home builder is they do a carpentry apprenticeship, run their own carpentry team, and then naturally progress into running their own building company. So, if the trades are affected, we will see less builders as well, which is going to create a an even bigger problem because we have a global housing shortage as it is. So we need more builders, not less,
Mhm,
but we need more professional builders. We need builders that are going to be around for the long term,
mhm,
running sustainable companies, and that is where I see a lot of hope because the young guys coming in, these guys are like a sponge.
mhm,
Um, from a coaching standpoint, when you tell these guys what they need to be doing, they just go out and they do it. They don't second guess themselves. They don't question. Nothing wrong with questioning. It's good to to ask more questions, but they don't let it hold them back from executing. And that's the 25 to 35 bracket. And these are the most successful builders we see in a very short period of time. The next bracket is probably the 35 to 45. Now, these guys do well because they do execute, but they're a little bit hesitant because they're a little bit battle scarred. So, is this really going to work? I'm not sure about this marketing strategy, etc. They think it through a bit more. They're a little bit slower, a little bit more hesitant. They do it, and they do get there in the end. But then we end up with this older bracket. And for us, it's a bit like the scene out the Matrix where Morpheus apologizes to Neo for, he says, we never free a mind over a certain age. It's dangerous. And we say the exact same thing at APB. We never attempt to free a mind over the age of 55. And that is simply because these guys have been in the trenches so long. When you try to show them a different way, they won't accept it. They can't allow themselves to accept it, because to accept what we're saying is true would be to admit they've wasted 30 years of their career working in a job rather than creating real worth. So they deny the margins that we talk about are realistic or even possible. They shut down completely, and they refuse to listen and implement. So that's why we don't target the over 55s. And I think I can say that because I'm over 55. That's not being ageist.
Really interesting. Super interesting to hear what you're seeing. Even beyond labor too, and maybe more top of mind for us at Bundle, being very materials and product focused, are the challenges with sourcing materials and cost overruns. And it was good to see that some of these problems are getting better. I think we've seen that kind of the further we get from the heart of COVID. But what I was interested to see is that the report points out that the number of builders now using spreadsheets versus other tools to compile their estimates was actually higher in 2022 than 2021, which seems surprising to me. That wasn't a big difference, but I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about why you think that may be. And my next question is about software, so we'll shift it the other direction and move more in the direction we want to hear.
Yeah, look, that stat was surprising and also very disappointing, because depending as to what stat you live by, I think the numbers are in the region of 90% of spreadsheets contain errors. And I'm sure we've all heard a story about a builder that forgot there was an error in the formula, and concrete didn't get included. That's money coming straight off the bottom line. Spreadsheets are great. They have a purpose, but for estimates, why when you've got dedicated software that yeah, I was going to say it doesn't make mistakes. Obviously, there's a potential for user error, but yeah, in terms of why this is happening, I think the reason is time. Yeah, we have to appreciate the builders have been under enormous time pressures over the last 2 years, and I don't think this is fully appreciated by the public either, because every time there is a delay, when there's a materials don't turn up and this particular activity has to be rescheduled, that's time the builder or the builder's team has to spend rescheduling that subcontractor and all the subsequent trades that are following on. It has a knock-on effect, and they're not just doing this once, they're doing it 3 and 4 times, and they're not getting any extra reward for that. They're doing all this work, there's no pay, and in fact it's costing them money, because those delays, every project has a cost per day in relation to the fixed costs of the running the building company, and that can typically run between $750 to $1,500 a day. It's an invisible cost that not many building companies are aware of. So every day that you have a delay, that is coming straight off your bottom line. So it's hurt builders in terms of they're working harder to make less net profit. It's been an extraordinarily tough time, and I think because of that, other things have gone by the wayside. Their marketing went by the wayside in 2022.
Mm,
Less builders were writing articles, blog articles, which we know is a proven way to generate quality leads. They
mm,
weren't emailing their database, which is 101 in sales. And social media activity went down in 2022 as
mm.
well. And that's a clear indication that builders simply did not have the time. And that was, I think that was summed up at the end of the year by the amount of builders experiencing burnout.
Mm. Oh, it's a bummer to hear. But hopefully some software solutions maybe can come in, some silver lining there. But as a software company ourselves, I was happy to see that almost 40% of builders invested more money into software in 2022, with 26% of respondents expected to spend more in 2023. I was curious to hear if you found certain subcategories or demographics of builders that were more likely to engage with software tools.
Yeah, look, I think overall, the younger builders are more likely. Any young builder coming into the industry, it's a given. What software should I use? Whereas maybe an older generation, and I'm not talking about the professional operators here, because these guys have been using software for years. But for a lot of guys, there is the question of should I use software? That's not even a question for the younger guys. It's which software. And another key difference as well, I think, with the younger guys is they are more likely to switch software programs if they see a better opportunity. And obviously, software is always evolving,
Mhm.
and there's always different options out there, and the younger guys are more likely to switch, which, as we know, that involves a lot of work. It's a big commitment to do that. So I think that's an interesting factor as well. So yeah, retention for software companies is going to become a bigger and bigger challenge, I think, in the years ahead.
Interesting. Something new to this industry. I think there's been few enough
Mhm.
software players that the lock-in stickiness has been maybe taken for granted.
Yeah, the number of new software providers is quite breathtaking as well. I seem to hear about a new one every week in our members group. It's just it's mind blowing how many are entering the market.
I would agree with you for sure. I think COVID was an interesting shift in the market, big picture, both we see on the builder side, but also the supplier side as well, which is an interesting trend.
Yeah. But
Um,
I'd also like just drop a word of caution as well, because we we are seeing that I mean, a lot of these new players that come in, they're exciting. Yeah, they always look good from a user experience because they're using the latest
mhm.
platform, the latest modeling. So it's easy to look good, but in terms of functionality, it's not easy to catch up with a company that's been doing it for many years. So and what we have seen is people switch and switch back. Things aren't
Interesting.
always as they seem.
Yeah, definitely. It's a complex industry for sure. More than just
Mm.
the coding with with this one. Awesome. So as we get close to the end here, one other question. It was interesting to see that the goals for builders over the next 12 months remain the same, with systemizing the business being the number one priority for most building company owners. Do you see technology being the major driver there that's really supporting that goal, or are there other drivers or processes that you think will really come in there?
Yeah, this is a real interesting one because it's never really changed, even when we analyze data from pre survey days.
Mm,
We can look back and we can see that in terms of the perceived priority of builders, it tends to, or it always tended to fall in terms of marketing and generating more leads. And then once COVID hit, that switched to becoming all about pricing and margins. But the overriding thing that builders always wanted to work on, whether it was marketing or pricing, was systemizing their building company. And so I think when you talk about systemizing, to a builder, they're looking at all aspects of their building company.
Mm.
and they're looking to implement systems and processes and procedures that are going to not only save them time, but remove them from being the bottleneck in their building
Yeah.
company as well. They're looking to create a business that can operate without them and free them up from a lot of the day to day. So I think that's the driving force behind that particular part of the survey.
Interesting. Very interesting. Well, great. That pretty much wraps us up for today. But Russ, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you chatting with me. And I think our audience will find your insights very informative. And so our audience knows we'll also be sharing the link to the full report, which I definitely recommend. And hope you have a great time exploring that yourself. And thank you to everyone for watching and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, Jana.
Yeah, thank you.